and welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodeling, Franklin Covey's head of product. In these conversations, we'll speak with many of the world's greatest leaders on the mistakes, methods, and mindsets that help them become the people they are today. We hope that hearing their hard-earned insights accelerate you on your journey. Today's guest is Ethan Mollick, professor at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, where he is the co-director of the Generative AI Labs, and his research focuses on AI's impact on work, entrepreneurship, and education. Ethan has become widely regarded as one of the world's experts on the influence of AI on the world and work. He has hundreds of thousands of followers across X and LinkedIn. He writes a popular Substack, One Useful Thing, and his recent book, Co-Intelligence, is a New York Times bestseller and was named by both the Financial Times and The Economist as one of the best business books of the world. Ethan was recently named by Time Magazine one of the most influential voices in AI, and he received the award of the MBA Professor of the Year by Poets and Quants. If you are interested in how AI should influence your world of work, today is your podcast. Professor Ethan Mollick, welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership.
Really excited to be here.
Wonderful. So I have been following you on Twitter for many years, I guess now X, and was following before you became the AI guru. For a long time, you were working at Wharton as a professor. You were teaching about innovation, entrepreneurship, how games can teach leaders. I followed you because you did an amazing job summarizing abstracts, journal abstracts on Twitter. And so it gave me a window into the academic world. I'm curious to hear from you to start. What was your motivation for diving so deeply into AI? What, pun semi-intended, what prompted you into this world?
So I've actually been an AI person for a while. When I was at MIT in grad school, I worked at the Media Lab in their AI group with Marvin Minsky, who's one of the founders of the field. But I was always the non-technical person. So I've always been the explainer for AI, making connections about what it can do. And so, involved using it in games and stuff, kept an eye on what's happening. So essentially when the LLM revolution hit, I had already been playing and talking about these systems for a long time for their educational potential. And I think I was one of the first people sort of in this world to see what was going on with first GPT-3 and then ChatGPT. And it just sort of put me in a position where I think there was a lot of interest in what I was doing, which led to sort of positive feedback loop where now I'm in contact with lots of people about this. I've written a book on it, and just have gotten very deep in this topic, and as a node, I think.
One thing that I find refreshing and distinct about your AI commentary online is that it's fun. That a lot of the AI commentary is very dense, and you do go into the deep technical issues, but for example, your canonical otter examples, every time a new model comes out, you have a traditional prompt that you ask it. So maybe talk to me about these zany examples that you give and how you kind of keep it lighthearted and fun. Is that intentional, or is it just your personality and you're enjoying it and you do the thing you enjoy?
So I think just as a general lesson on AI, play is one of the best ways to get to know this. There's two avenues in, using it for everything you do for work and then using it for fun. So I think I've always been a fan of play, right? Games are something I build. And also, a lot of people in this world are computer scientists and they care about code and they are, they've built a machine built on human words. Right. And what this machine is trained on is the entire corpus of human language. So to make it do interesting things kind of requires approaching it from a playful humanities almost standpoint or managerial standpoint of like, what can this thing do? So I have it write bizarre poetry. I give it impossible challenges. I ask it to create, a version of Missile Command, but relativity actually takes place in that and works there. I ask every image generator to create a otter on a plane using Wi-Fi because at the time I was doing this, I was on a plane with my daughter who loves, otters, and we were, we decided, I thought it'd be a fun joke to send her. Like, if you have a playful attitude towards these things, it can often help you see the more serious side as well.
Outside of your experimentation, and the way that you use AI for work that might be distinct challenges other people don't face, how do you use AI? Which models are you using most and least commonly? What kind of prompting guidelines do you follow?
So the big revolution that's been happening in the AI space has been taking all of the stuff that used to be very hard about AI and making it easier. So one thing we're doing, I run the generative AI lab at Wharton along with my wife, and we've been doing some rigorous testing with a bunch of other great researchers of prompting techniques. It turns out all the stuff that used to matter doesn't matter anymore, right? It turns out bribing the AI or threatening it, none of that matters. Being nice to it, not being nice to it. But more seriously, things like chain of thought prompting, which was a very common technique that everyone still teaches for AI, doesn't have any effect on accuracy in the studies that we're doing. So this stuff is getting easier to use. Similarly, right around the time we're recording this, GPT-5 was released a couple weeks ago. And it is two things. It's a very good model, a set of models, but it's also a router that automatically decides which AI model you should use in any circumstance. It's not always good at that, but for a hard problem, it uses a more complicated AI. For a simple problem, it uses a smaller AI. And so you can start to see this move towards making things easier. But my general advice is pick one of the big three, Google's Gemini, Claude, Anthropic's Claude, or OpenAI's GPTs, and then generally use the most advanced model you can. At the time we're talking, that's that's Gemini 2.5, Claude 4.1, and Opus, and GPT-5 thinking. But that will always change. But generally use the most advanced model you can.
It's refreshing that prompting doesn't really matter very much anymore. I felt like that was one of the hurdles for a lot of people using AI for a long time, was feeling like, oh, I'm not using it the right way. I don't know how to prompt it. You read these articles online about prompt engineers. So I think it's a major innovation by the Frontier Labs to kind of get to a standard use case working, the entry point being a lot easier for a lot of people.
I think it's less, and you'll see this as a theme, it's less the labs consciously doing this and more as models get larger and better trained, they just start to get human intent better. So it becomes less important, to put them in a headspace, right, than it used to be. When I wrote my book, it was all about giving personas to AI. You're a helpful advisor. That still can be useful, but the AI now has enough theory of mind that you can say, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, and it anticipates the problem without having to pretend to be somebody.
So maybe it's the Frontier Lab solving it from model advancements and not necessarily solving it from a product intentional perspective. So that,
which I think is the big point overall, right? Which is that these still are coding people creating coding applications, and they don't know your use case, your business, and that's where there's a lot of opportunity to explore and create, is to figure out what it does for you and your use case.
Yeah, you referenced the launch of GPT-5. So in the last couple of weeks since GPT-5 launched, there have been critiques saying we have reached the plateau of the S-curve. We're now going to be seeing more incremental improvements in model performance, that the next phase is going to be about AI application and not AI foundational innovation. What do you think about the advancement in the foundational models themselves? Have we reached the plateau of that S-curve?
I don't see any reason to suspect that we have. I don't understand sort of there's a online chatter that veers between apocalyptic, that AI will never advance, and apocalyptic AI is going to murder us all.
Yeah.
And if you just look at the sort of advancement curves, they're exactly on a fairly fast doubling path, depending on what you look at, a 7-month doubling path, a 14-month doubling path, a 3-month one. But I just don't see, either talking to labs or in the results or in the experiences, that that's what's happening right now. There's actually two things that AI is trying to maximize, labs are trying to maximize. They're trying to lower cost, and they're also trying to, which is the same thing as lowering environmental impact and everything else people care about, speed, increasing speed, and the other is increasing ability. And so you're going to see advances in both of those. I just don't see any sign this has run out of steam, and it's a weird sort of argument to make when we've just seen models get the gold medal at the International Math Olympiad. So I think it seems like a strange, just the story of the moment. I don't think that we could plateau. I just don't see any indication that's happening.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed following, I've enjoyed so much about your commentary and thought leadership on the topic, is that you do break out of the Twitter hype cycle of the moment. There's such an echo chamber for following whatever the topic du jour is on AI, as you said, AI apocalyptic approach, or believing that the models have slowed down. I think you take a really empirical view, and you still summarize a lot of very interesting journal articles. So I'm curious if you could just share with our audience, or people who maybe aren't following you regularly, what's some academic research that's come out about AI applications that has really stuck with you?
So being an academic, I'll start with two papers that I've written with a team of fellow researchers at MIT and Harvard and the University of Warwick. One kind of kicked off some AI investment in the early days, which was we did a study at Boston Consulting Group of consultants took 8% of the global workforce, gave some GPT-4, which is now obsolete, some not, and we saw, quality improvements of 30% and speed improvements of 25%, and the low performers got the biggest boost. That's now been validated over and over again, right? This performance gain. More recently, we've done some work on teams with using AI at Procter & Gamble, and they gave us 776 of their employees, and we had them work either individually or in cross-functional teams of two. Some got AI and some did not. Individuals using AI, again, the obsolete GPT-4, performed as well as teams, right? So really big kind of performance gains. Also, again, to sort of talk about research I've done, and then we can zoom out. Innovation. It turns out AI is really good at generating ideas and probably should be part of your innovation ideation process. And but there's also weirdness. So I have another paper with, I'm sure a lot of the audience here is familiar with Bob Cialdini's Principles of Influence. So in a paper with him and Angela Duckworth and a few other researchers along with me, Leonard Menke in particular, did some interesting work. We found the AI is persuadable by the same persuasion techniques you can use for humans. So foot in the door, all the techniques you learn. So I think there's a lot of really interesting work out there, and that's just my piece. Just a couple days ago, research came out showing that a voice-powered LLM model in the Philippines was able to, as a recruiter, was preferred. People selected it more as a recruiter rather than talking to a human, and it did a better job placing people and giving out offers, and had higher successful match rates. There's really interesting work on in sub-Saharan Africa showing that AI can be a really effective tutor when used properly. There's just a lot of exciting work out there right now.
I appreciate you summarizing all of those pieces. There was another piece that you cited recently around diversity in creative writing. I think one thing that people critique AI for is, it's going to create all this AI slop, or it is not as diverse and is not as creative as humans. Maybe if you want to talk briefly about that paper that you were summarizing.
I mean, so the creativity question is generally an interesting one. So this paper found that if you gave AI the beginning of a story, it would complete them with as much diversity or more diversity in writing style, approach, theme as humans would, especially if you gave it some random words. So, here's a story and here's some random words to inspire you. So I think there's this view, AI does produce slop, right? The median content is not, not great. That can be changed by asking it more interesting questions, having more dialogue, giving it more prompting to kind of work with, less kind of magic, more sort of like giving it feedback like an editor, which fits a general theme of how to work with AI. Give it feedback, right? And that's how you get better results.
Yeah. You, in all of these examples you've been sharing about the dramatic impact of AI, and in many ways AI outperforming humans, the AI as HR in the Philippines example. There's a lot of discussion in the AI community about the path towards AGI, towards superintelligence. How do you define AGI? I feel like it's something that there's a lot of different floating definitions around. So how do you define AGI, and do you think we will get there?
So this is the flip side of the question you asked earlier if we plateaued. So AGI is this nebulous term, artificial general intelligence, which is something like the machine's better than a human at every intellectual task. And sometimes it's defined as better at expert level across 80% of tasks. I mean, we don't have a good definition. Some people like Tyler Cohen have said we've already achieved AGI. We just haven't integrated it in with the level of the models we have today. I don't think it's that useful a definition. Partially because in our first paper, we coined the idea of the jagged frontier of AI, that it's good at some stuff you wouldn't expect, bad at some stuff you wouldn't expect. I think we're going to see a jagged AGI. We already do. Like, the AI is better than most humans at a bunch of topics. And, you have to be a really good expert to be better than it in a lot of areas. It already outperforms doctors in diagnosis in controlled experiments. So I think it's going to be but integrating that in with organizations to think about how we work with that system, that's the challenge. Now, if you talk to the AI labs, they're actually skipping AGI and they're going for superintelligence. They think they can a machine that's a super genius and smarter than any human. That would probably change things in a much more direct way than a kind of human equivalent system. But I think we've got 5 to 10 years of change, even if there was a plateau, of just trying to integrate AI into our systems today.
Yeah. So speaking of integrating AI into our systems and around the challenges of applying AI, NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang recently said the last 10 years was really about the science of AI, but the next 10 years is going to be about the application science of AI. There was an MIT study, your PhD alma mater, an MIT study came out recently that 95% of corporate AI initiatives are failing today, that they're not achieving the goals they set out to, they're not having the financial impact they expected. So I'm curious how leaders should be thinking about AI application and adoption? And given all the unbelievable use cases and all of the wow moments we've all had personally with it, why is it at an enterprise, at an organizational level, why has it been so hard to realize kind of significant gains? Or do you disagree with that study?
I mean, I don't think that study is a particularly great example of stuff. It's not very clear how it was done. It was some sort of survey work. But I don't disagree that, like, it's a hard road to haul, and you should be thinking of this as an R&D effort, right? We don't know how to integrate AI in, and I worry that people will just say, okay, vendors will figure it out. They have the same problem as everyone else. So my framework for thinking about AI integration organizations, and I work with lots and lots of large companies on this, is, and this is not like gospel, this is just sort of my viewpoint, is leadership, lab, and crowd. You need those three things to make your integration successful. You need leaders who actually are articulating a view. I find Jensen Huang's stuff to be very interesting, but it's always this vague view of what AI would do, right? It'll work besides us as agents. Like, what specifically do you want to change in your organization? What incentives do you need to do? What process changes do you make? Are you leading from the front? I was talking to Nikolai Tangen, who is the CEO of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and the way he got AI transformation is he personally requires everyone to use AI in his presence when what have you used AI for, and has pushed it through at the organizational level. That's the leadership piece. You have to actually be pushing for use. Crowd means everyone in the system, everyone in your company is going to be exploring AI uses, or almost everyone using tools. Do they have access to tools? And are they incentivized? Because most people using AI right now to get performance gains, they're not fools. They're never going to show the company the performance gains, right? 45% of Americans are using AI at work. And like the issue ends up being, okay, well, why would I show you when I look smarter using AI? When I know what happens,
I save time, totally.
Yeah, if I show you performance gains, what happens when there's performance gains? People get fired. I'm not going to get incentivized for this, and I'm working 90% less. Mm-hmm. So unless you incentivize the crowd, they're not going to do stuff. And then you need a lab. You need to be doing R&D effort. I really hope. I mean, I think that 95% number is not real at all. But I actually wouldn't mind if it was 95% of these efforts failing, because if you're not doing R&D, what are you going to do? This is the time for leadership, is to experiment and figure out what's going on. And if you look at throughout the 1900s, the way the U.S. management succeeded, U.S. companies succeeded, was management innovation, experiments in management styles. That has actually not happened as much in the last 20 years. And I think we need to restart that and spend some R&D money for AI.
I love that framework, leadership, crowd, and lab. On the crowd front, are you encouraging general purpose tools? So give every employee at your company access to GPT Teams or Copilot or Gemini, et cetera. Or are you encouraging vertical specific tools? So in marketing, use Jasper, and in engineering, use Claude Code, or both, or kind of where do you suggest companies start?
So I think people need general purpose tools because they want to be able to build solutions. That doesn't mean that you won't find Harvey useful, or that Claude, everybody who's coding should probably be using
Harvey is a legal assistant for those.
Right, Harvey's a legal assistant. I mean, but you should know enough internally to know where they have advanced. Like all of the vendors, every vendor you talk to, with one or two exceptions, essentially, is all using the same off-the-shelf LLMs that you have access to, right? So I think people attribute magic to vendors, but software engineers are no longer the magic piece here. You need to figure out how to give these things instructions and talk to them. And I think a lot of people whitewash their own AI usage by saying, I'll buy it from a vendor. Why would that vendor know more about the problem space that you're facing and than your experts? Why would they be the ones to validate what the use is? How are you going to get competitive advantage in that case? So I do think there is room for vendors, and especially in narrow areas that aren't your area of expertise. But in your core business operations, oh man, I think you need to be doing experimentation with, get as close to the metal as possible. And that tends to be pick one of the major model makers and get that internal use going.
Have you seen interesting applications to incentivize trial and sharing of best practices, like really the care and feeding post implementation, not just rolling the balls out and letting the kids play, but saying, okay, now everybody has access to GPT-5. Now let's really get adoption across the company.
So lots of interesting plans out there. I've talked to leaders who have made it so that whenever you do a hire, the team doing the hire has to spend 2 hours using AI to try and do the job and then rewrite the job description. I've seen cases where anytime you ask for budget, you're asked to do it with AI first for an hour and then rewrite your budget description. Moderna did a really interesting thing where they used HR as their Bryce from Moderna as their sort of choke point. And when you went through a review process at the end of the year, they built an elaborate set of AI tools to help you with your own performance reviews. And people who used it would be more likely to get more money because they wrote better performance reviews, but it took you through a very elaborate process. So that was a nice choke point to get people using these systems. I've seen cash prizes at the end of every week, hackathons. I mean, there's lots of approaches. You kind of need that lab there, though, because that takes the ideas from the crowd and helps turn them into reality. And often the best people in the crowd are the people who should be populating the lab.
That was the next question I was going to ask. Talk to me about ideal lab structure. Is this, you need to take people out of the engineering team, take product managers, or who are you putting in this lab, and how do you structure them to really have the maximum impact?
Yep, the lab has three functions. Immediate productization. So taking ideas, like a good prompt comes out, everyone should be using that prompt. You should go test the prompt, build a better one, and then send it out through whatever system you're using so everyone could do that, right? So immediate stuff. Second thing you're going to be doing in the lab is benchmarking. Do you have benchmarks at actual problems that you're facing and how good the AI is so you know what it's doing? And then the third is building for a future that doesn't exist yet. Agentic end-to-end systems, something that doesn't quite work, trying to build future stuff. I don't have any numbers on this, but we do have some early evidence suggesting that coders are actually worse at using AI often than non-coders because it works more like a person than a machine. So I would say that you want subject matter experts mixed with some coders and developers who are AI savvy. But you do need those people every organization I talk to knows the people in the crowd who actually really they're desperately evangelizing AI to everybody and no one's listening to them. Those are the people who are really good inside the lab.
What mistakes have you seen companies make in AI application that should be avoided?
I think there's a danger in starting with, responsible AI is an important thing to do. But people launch responsible AI initiatives before they launched, before AI got where it is, and it tends to often be lagging. And so there's often very elaborate committees set up with a bunch of rules that are based on how AI worked in 2023. Right now, for example, the information security risk level is at the level of of another cloud app. I mean, when JP Morgan and Novartis are all using it and Moderna are all using AI, there are ways forward to use these systems. And I think creating unnecessary blockers is a problem, right? You want to be responsible, but you have to revisit this and you can't just have, policies. That's one angle. Second is leaders not articulating a clear vision themselves and not using AI. So it's one, I don't like the emails that came out of, Stripe or Amazon saying AI is really important in the future of our business. Where was the vision there about how AI will make business different? What does the organization look like 5 years from now? What's your vision that you're trying, this dodging the question of vision at a leadership level is a big problem. And then not giving people access to tools, right? And, or giving them inferior tools can be a real problem as well.
So you brought up earlier, first off, thank you for those very concrete, practical examples of where AI adoption application goes wrong. You brought up environmental impact earlier as one of the goals. Well, the goal of the AI Frontier Labs is making it easier to deliver, which also will have positive impact on the environment. There are a number of different common critiques of AI that I want to run by you and hear your perspective because you're obviously, broadly speaking, a real AI optimist. So the first is environmental impact. For people who are worried about AI, energy usage, and whatnot, what do you say?
And by the way, I like to think of myself as optimistic pragmatist on this, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, optimists tend to think AI is going to save the world, and pessimists tend to think it'll kill us all. So you got to kind of calibrate on those goals. On environmental impact, look, I think that what has happened is, again, indexing on 2023 numbers. At this point, environmental impacts, we have audited reports and we have self-reports from OpenAI, and basically using an AI query is negligible. In fact, the average ChatGPT query uses about as much energy as a Google query in 2008, right? So and creating an image is about the same as using your laptop for 15 seconds, right? This is not, at this point, at the individual level. Water use is a fifth, is for cooling, which doesn't disappear, is a fifth of a teaspoon. If you're really interested in environmental impact at the individual level, giving up a couple hamburgers a month would be a significant energy gain versus not using AI. At the aggregate level, though, obviously this matters a lot. People are building data centers, they're restarting nuclear plants. So it's like everything else. At the individual level, I'm not very concerned about AI use, and I think people are indexing on older numbers. But on the aggregate level, we're building out AI to be a major part of society, and that's going to use a lot of energy, right? And now it's not a very large portion of American energy, but data centers are going to be a growing piece. So individual impact versus aggregate, I think people tend to confuse those two a lot. And I think we need to figure out, green energy and other policies for large scale.
But the individual aggregates to the aggregate. So, if every single person gets obsessed about AI and they use a lot more of it than an aggregate, we're going to be using a lot more AI and then have a larger energy impact. So,
yes, but it's a very similar argument to anything else that you're kind of doing that way, right? Which is, again, a hamburger is 150,000 times more water than your weekly ChatGPT use. Yeah. I think if we're trying to do aggregate decision making, which is a reasonable thing to do, it's a weird thing to apply it to AI, but not to other
against other areas that have a huge impact as well. That makes sense. Second common critique is about AI is going to come and take all of our jobs. What is your reaction to that fear about AI leading to massive job displacement?
I don't know. I think actually, and this is a case where economists are a little over optimistic because we can only model in the past, right? And every time there's been a wave of disruption, it creates new jobs, and that may very well be the case, right? I mean, and to be clear, jobs are bundles of tasks. AI is not good at everything, right? My job is very overlapping with AI in every research project that people have done, business school professor, and I already see it. I know AI is a better grader than me, but I don't use it for grading. Why not? Because my students would hate it if I used it for grading. So even though it replaces that part of my job, I'm not doing it, for that yet. So I think it's going to be very uneven to see how that happens, but I think there will be job changes, and I don't know what the end result is, right? I mean, we've never seen a technology like this aim at white-collar work in a general way that we've seen before. Will we need as many coders? Will we need more coders? I have no way of predicting that. I think it could be a little Pollyannish to say there will be, that it always leads to more jobs. I also think, everyone won't have a job by 2035 seems unlikely, but I think we should be taking these scenarios seriously. And again, we're at the policy level. At the aggregate level, we need to start making some choices about how to make AI more human in a useful way for everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate the intellectual humility on that. And I think oftentimes people will come out with very strong proclamations and you say, it seems to, relatively unknowable. So I appreciate your kind of on the one hand and the other hand answer there. Another critique of AI is its treatment of intellectual property, that people have spent years, decades. I mean, you now have written a New York Times bestselling book. Congratulations. Franklin Covey obviously has a corpus of many New York Times bestselling books. We've spent years, millions of dollars, and a lot of that information is now powering the genius, the intelligence of these AI systems. So what do you say about AI's treatment of intellectual property?
I mean, I think the lawyers are deciding what this means, but it clearly trained on tons of our information without permission. And I think the question is, what does that mean, right? It's not directly reproducing work, so it's not plagiarizing in a conventional sense. But, it also seems disingenuous to say, oh, it's just like training a child. It doesn't matter what we do. I mean, I think it's an uncomfortable situation to be in, right? The labs did not train on open source material. They trained on the open web. There's obviously pirated books that, whether by hook or by crook, that ended up in there. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's in some ways a legal matter to decide. I mean, you have your own personal opinions on this. I'm glad my content is in there because the AI actually is more likely to refer to my stuff. And mm-hmm. We found that when Google digitized the Google Books, which basically got shut down for copyright concerns, retrospectively, it turns out from some pretty good research that being digitized in Google Books actually increased book sales. I don't know what the long-term effect is. I don't think it was a fair decision to just decide to do this, but now it is a legal one, and I understand people have ethical concerns about that. They have every right to. You have reasons to have ethical concerns about how energy is used, about all these other factors. These are personal matters that have to be decided on, and I think people fall different ways on this.
What recommendation do you have to content companies over the course of the next, in medium term, let's say 2 to 5 years? Is there an opportunity for being a breakthrough IP company in a world in which so much of this IP gets leaked into these AI models and then is broadly available?
I think the nature of IP is going to change dramatically. The models are better at writing than they were before. They're better at synthesizing and doing research and information. Increasingly, you'll be using agents to do your work and do searches, and you'll want your system to know your content. I'm very happy the AI knows my stuff because some of its ideas are now my ideas, right? And it actually refers to me. So I think that's a good thing. But I think that conventional IP is going to be under stress. I mean, I think what a lot of people think about IP, it's not really the patent holding someone back. It's the ability to build something, which is still too complicated with too many pieces and too many jagged edges for the AI to do well. But I think if you're doing pure IP, I think, there's going to be a threat to many writers. There already is. If you go look at my book, you'll find I just got an email from a university in Chile saying, we bought your book and we also bought the workbook that went with it. I'm like, what workbook? And I'm like, oh, there's an AI generated workbook that somebody put together and they're selling it as, we're already seeing that stuff happen. And I think, high quality slop is going to be out there soon.
Yeah. Normally I end these interviews with a lightning round. You've been a lightning round throughout. You're an incredibly quick thinker, but I do have a couple of questions that didn't naturally fit into one of the buckets that I was thinking about in organizing today's conversation. So I'm going to kind of fire out a few quick ones for you. First question is, what advice do you have for college seniors? You mentioned earlier before we started recording that you're taking your daughter to college today. So maybe to her, you're going to be driving soon to drop her off at college. What advice do you have for her as she's preparing to enter the workforce into a totally changing world?
So we don't have answers. My two pieces of advice that I give to everybody is, do what you love, because you're more likely to do better at that than and be in the top percentage, and what you're good at tends to be what you love and what you get paid for. And the second is actually, I think bundled jobs are the right way to go. Jobs that bundle many tasks, right? Being a doctor, where there's an impossible set of tasks you have to do. You have to be a good diagnostician and have good hand skills, and be able to have good empathy, and be able to, organize things and run paperwork. That's an impossible job. If AI takes some of that and you can concentrate on the stuff you like, that feels like a good thing, right? So I think narrow jobs where you do one thing and you produce a press release, I think that's under more threat from AI than teacher, professor, doctor, podcaster. Maybe there's jobs that are very diverse across a set of things where I think there's more value in doing that.
Relatedly, how do you view AI changing leadership in the future? What will the job of managers and leaders, how will that change, and how should they be preparing for it now?
I think that it changes leadership right now, and if you're not getting leadership changes out of AI, you're doing it wrong, right? At the leadership level, we know that AI gives pretty good advice, and leaders are often lonely at the top. They're listening to podcasts like this one and getting, and taking courses and buying books that, your team writes that I write, and going and getting MBAs. The AI is a good advisor on this. I still think it's worth learning this stuff, reading the books, obviously, for both of our sakes, but I also think that there is, if you're not getting advice from this, you're asking it to simulate possible outcomes, pushing you on topics, doing research, all the stuff that you would have to delegate down. If nothing else, I think about this story. I ran into a Harvard physicist who told me, a quantum physicist who said all of his best ideas come from AI. And I asked him, is AI good at quantum physics? He said, no, but it's really good at asking me the right questions. So I think just having someone to talk to and get you through this and help you with thinking through ideas is incredibly helpful.
Very tactically on that example, how do you get the AI to be a good thinking partner? What kind of workflows do you recommend?
It differs for everybody. I know some people who absolutely love voice mode with custom instructions. So you explain to it who you are, or you keep memory on, and then you just talk to it on your way to work. Like, I'm working through this problem, help me out. The more formal way is you set up a project in OpenAI, in ChatGPT, or in Anthropic's Claude, or any of the other systems that do this with all of your sort of decision-making papers, and you have an ongoing conversation with it about it. But it's really about interaction. Give it context, explain what the issue is, and say, what questions should I be asking? What am I missing? Give me 20 ways that somebody might do this. I recommend abundance and everything. Just ask the AI for tons of stuff. Give me 50 different possibilities I should consider. Let it spark ideas for you.
I love that concept of creating the project and just giving context. It's just, I think one of the encouragements that you've always had is play, iterate, test, trial. And I think that's such an important concept for everybody, such an important mindset for everybody to interpret. The second to last question for you, how should people stay up to speed on the advancements in AI? It feels like everything is moving so quickly. You're an incredible follow. You have an amazing Substack. One useful thing, you wrote a best-selling book on the topic. Who are the other Ethan Mollicks out there? Are there courses people should be taking? How do we all stay up to speed?
So it's a little bit of a hard question, right? Because there's a thin line between staying up to speed and joining the churning hype cycle that probably is not interesting to most people, right? So I have to be part of this whole thing of what's breaking, and 95% of this is people just being like, AI is dead, AI is amazing. That's not that useful. And so, I think, I think there's, I've got a Substack. I think there's lots of interesting people posting stuff. Ali Miller on LinkedIn is a smart person doing things. And I think that social media with a few follows is a kind of useful way to go. I try and be helpful with my Substack. There's other people who do this stuff. But I think it's staying up to date is playing with these systems as they come out. Like that is the most useful thing you could do is actually use these things. And I really do think the difference between being good at AI and bad at AI is not taking hundreds of courses it's using these systems for everything you do and getting a sense of what they do. And I find people have a psychological barrier. Either they're worried about what AI can do, or they find it unnerving, or they don't know how to start. And you just start by starting. You begin by beginning. You just start using this to do things, and that's the way to stay up to date. And it's much more useful than reading hundreds of articles.
That's great. I totally agree. So final question. This is Franklin-Covey's leadership company. So we're going to end on leaders and people and not on AI. But final question for you is, who is a leader that has greatly influenced you in your career and life, and what are lessons that we all can learn from them?
Oh, that is a really interesting question, and one that I should have been better prepared for than I was. I've been lucky enough to be mentored by lots of people in different areas, and I've also been an entrepreneur and realized how bad I am, or was as a leader. Hopefully, I've gotten better at it. But I've met a lot of people who I really admire along the way. In the sort of academic-y world, I've had. Been lucky to have a leader that's a little different than others. My mentor, Ezra Zuckerman, who's a professor and a dean at MIT. And what I found really interesting about him was that, not only leading by example, but actually the idea of mentoring around principles of truth as opposed to getting things done. We can do that in academia. We can't do that in other places. About focusing on, is this meaningful? Does every word count? Are you doing something that that is going to advance the state of knowledge and the state of humanity? I find it's a very different. I meet lots of corporate leaders who I really admire all the time, but there's just something very different about kind of an intellectual leadership, about thinking about is the work meaningful and good that you're producing, and I want to help you produce better work that I find just different than you find in other environments.
Well, I think he has been successful. You have created very impactful work. So Dr. Mollick, thank you so much for joining today. This is a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot throughout. I also just want to thank you for being such a public intellectual on this topic and doing it in a way that is both interesting and engaging. So I have learned a lot following you over the years. I'm sure many of our listeners have as well, and if they haven't, they'll be following now. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And to all of our listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. Please join us next week for another episode of Franklin-Covey on Leadership.